something at some other time. Otherwise, you would give it up now, you see. So every contract is a promissory obligation, but money, which is instrumental in all of our trade and commerce and sustaining all industry, is subject to this obfuscation, where for the mere costs of publication, the banking system falsifies a $100,000 debt to it, which instead is naturally an obligation to pay and retire the principal from circulation. The principal is not the property of the banking system. Never, never, never is it the property of the banking system. No debt exists to the banking system. True, however, an obligation exists to pay and retire the principal from circulation, which is not what the banking system faithfully executes. Instead, they falsify the principal into a false debt to the banking system. Worse than laundering $100,000 of principal into their unrightful possession, denying the real creditor who produced and gave up the home for the promissory obligation, denying them interest. The banking system then claims that this as if this $100,000 of principal was at risk, and that this risk therefore justified interest, whereas in fact only $2 was at risk, and this $2 would be recouped in just a tiny fraction of the usual first payment of any issuance of any money for any purported debt, which is not a debt, is a promissory obligation. And so this further obfuscation of an obligation to pay and retire principal from circulation being obfuscated into a falsified debt to the banking system, which only ostensibly justifies interest but does in fact not justify interest, then results in this implicit obligation, which I outlined to my high school teacher, obligated us to maintain a vital circulation by perpetually reborrowing principal and interest as an ever greater and eventually terminal sum of debt, which explains all of our present issues, and which is the very principle that the computer models that I provided to the Reagan administration used to actually calculate the maximum possible lifespan of the present system governed by existent interest rates and circulation and debt. So the difference then is that the peripheral banks interface with the people and insulate the central bank from, the more discoverable fact that they're mere publishers of evidence of our promissory obligations to each other. The peripheral banks are made to borrow money from the Federal Reserve, which money, of course, never exists. If you're working on your car and you come over to borrow a 14-inch crescent wrench from me and I don't have one, I can't loan it to you. They just create evidence of such a thing, but based on our own promissory obligation, which is the real thing that's issued, but obfuscated into a falsified debt upon which, we're charged interest. And the consequence is not just this eventually a terminal sum of artificial indebtedness, which actually precipitates relatively quickly. This is the second lifespan of the Federal Reserve System. The first lifespan concluded a mere 15 years into its existence after promising to solve all the problems it can only cause, you see. It can't provide any stability at all. It makes an absolutely unsustainable system, and it precipitates not just an injustice, but a perpetual escalation of injustice until the injustices result in complete dispossession of the subject people, and in other words, a terminal and intolerable sum of injustice, which is wholly destructive to the system in the end. So a consequence of this interest then is that when we buy the $100,000 home, and let's just say for the sake of round numbers we might pay $400,000 in interest on that $100,000 home over whatever period of time, just for round numbers. Then we pay $500,000 for a $100,000 home. But what we need to understand from this obfuscation of the currency is that, yes, we may pay off that debt, but to do so, we've assumed all of the principal and interest as new debt. So at the termination of the term of the loan, at conclusion of payment, which is not repayment, but multiplied overpayment, which is not even owed to the banks, what happens is we owe so much principal and interest as principal we originally borrowed and interest we paid against it. So at the end of paying for a $100,000 home, we owe $500,000 in this particular case. And so there is no justice to the system at all. And what mathematically perfected economy does is it restores to we the people the right to issue our promissory obligations free of exploitation through a common monetary foundry, which is not a private for-profit business. It has no assets. It would exist today largely is no more than software in a data center which certify creditworthiness and maintain our accounts. If we qualify to pay $83.33 a month for a $100,000 home with a 100-year lifespan, we get it. And so a person with even the most menial part-time job could readily afford a brand new home anywhere in the world under mathematically perfected economy, whereas what we're suffering under this system is inherent, inevitable, terminal dispossession by falsification of indebtedness and multiplication of that falsified indebtedness into a terminal sum of artificial debt. And this is what we have to perceive then in order to understand that there is one and one only solution. It is this mathematically perfected economy. It's the only thing that eradicates all possible injustices. And it does this even without even administration at all. In other words, nobody sits over it and says, oh, we need to introduce more money into circulation. Our own demands for prosperity predicate how much circulation needs to exist whenever any of us assume a promissory obligation, which is automatically administered to and executed by the obligatory schedule of payment in such a way that the currency is always, always, always immutable. That is fully dedicatable to sustaining industry and commerce, and always so in a perpetual one-to-one-to-one relationship between remaining circulation, remaining value of represented property, and remaining obligation always to pay just that much for the remaining value of the represented property.
Okay, this is Jim Condit again in Cincinnati. Al, did you get your questions out that you wanted to get out? Al? Oh, he might be on mute. Michael, let me, and I guess then after I do this, I'll transition the hostship back to Fred if he's still on. But I wanted to ask you three questions to try to, when you were off air, I told the listeners that I wanted to ask you three questions that are all related, I think, and maybe you can answer them. Let me just ask all three, then I think they're related. One is, if the Congress passed a law and said for a transition, we're going to put Michael in charge of what to do with the economic system. One, would you shut down the Fed, or just shut them down, dismiss
Absolutely.
them?
They would be history before morning.
All right, number two, what would you replace it with, if anything, as far as issuing the money or keeping track of the debts or the loans and obligations? And three, would the money, if the money is issued by a central authority, I'm not clear what you're saying on that, but if it is issued by a central authority, would the money issued be based on gold, or would it be based on goods and services and the near-term potential of the country, or something else?
Okay, the last question I already answered.
Well, first answer the second one on would you replace the Fed with anything?
I'll go through all three of them.
Okay.
If you put me in charge of this, I actually prescribed a mathematic proof to the Reagan campaign in 1979. He hadn't even received the Republican nomination when I prescribed to the Reagan people. I've actually presented mathematically perfected economy to every American United States president since and including Gerald Ford. to clarify the history a little bit more for you. The Reagan people were very receptive to me. That is, more lower people in the administration. They were very good people, very intelligent, very patriotic, very concerned that I was absolutely on the money. But Reagan himself was really, in truth, a simpleton. And they failed to reach him. A rift developed in the Reagan administration. The proposition of mathematically perfected economy may in fact be responsible for David Stockman's resignation from director of OMB. I can't say for certain, but the pattern fits the whole pattern of what went on with the Reagan administration, which largely to his credit, I'm not talking about Reagan himself, but other people heard and greatly appreciated the arguments for singular solution, inevitable failure, and these people totally concurred even just 2 and 3 years into the first Reagan term that all of my projections were coming true. Now in this prescription for transforming any economy into or lie of economy into the present system of exploitation, in other words, in a mathematically perfected economy, I prescribed how to do this immediately and even virtually without cost. In fact, if you add up cost versus benefit, it has a negative cost, or in other words, there is no cost in it. But actually implementing it does have some cost. So in fairness, its costs nonetheless are negligible. They are basically software for managing the accounts in a banking system with a further few algorithms which exercise the principles of certifying creditworthiness. So the system is automated, and the arguments for this conversion are, really being exhaustive necessarily in accounting for all possible contest. The arguments are extensive, and the people our audience would probably rather that we just give the simple, keep it simple version of this, and I only mention this because I'm fully accountable to answering for any question of aberration or injustice that might possibly be raised. So the issue is this: we have terminal sums of falsified debt, and the question, as in any case of injury, is how do you restore the injured party to a state they would have existed in if there were no injury? And so this is the object of this transformation from any of these systems of exploitation in any country and every country of the world into mathematically perfected economy. An object is to restore to the people the state of non-injury which they would exist in if they had existed under mathematically perfected economy the whole while, because these unascended systems of exploitation are indeed monumental crimes against humanity. So this is our object. And how do we accomplish that? Well, the issue that we have here that the Obama administration and the Bush administration are trying to address by rescuing the banking system, which is the means of stealing from us, and of course none of these methods have any potential to actually rescue us. All that they can do is by assuming further debt that they're not even servicing, pour enough money into circulation that as that might distribute across the lie of economy, it might allow us to exist for some further while. But those days too are numbered, because the ways that that money can get across a system which is in terminal